Going to take a couple of minutes to do our introductions here and give some additional folks time to sign into the Zoom and get organized. Hello and welcome. On behalf of the Technology Law and Legal Education Summer Webinar Series Committee, thank you for joining us. We are so pleased to have you with us here today. I'm Danielle Copes, Assistant Professor of Law at the University of Memphis, and I will be hosting today's session. Before we begin and learn about an AI-enabled tax law competition for law students, I would first like to invite you to join us again next Wednesday, July 15th, for our next summer webinar session. That one is called Ready Player One. And during today's session, I will post some information about that session in our chat. And I encourage you to check it out and consider joining us again next week. So today we are going to keep our introduction very short. We would like to give our presenters as much time as possible with the hour that we have together to share their ideas and begin what we hope will be a very interactive session with all of you in attendance today. So without further ado, today's speakers are Professor Diane Kemker from Loyola University Chicago School of Law. Diane is a clinical assistant professor of law. We are also joined by Professor Julie Manaspley, Executive Director of Graduate Tax Programs and Associate Clinical Professor of Law at Loyola Law School, Los Angeles. And rounding out our panel today is Professor Jordan Jefferson from Quinnipiac University School of Law, where she is a director of the law library and associate professor of law. Rather than tell you about each of our esteemed panelists, they're going to take some time to introduce themselves a little more and tell you about their interest in why they wanted to create this law student tax law competition. So one more housekeeping note before we get started. I will turn things over to our presenters in just a moment. Again, we want this to be interactive. So as you have questions and comments during their presentation, please go ahead and post them in the chat, and we will stop periodically to answer questions and comments and hopefully make this a lively and engaging discussion involving all of you. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Diane and Jordan and Julie to tell us about an AI-enabled tax law competition for law students.
Well, thank you all for coming, and I want to thank my co-panelists for giving their time and their efforts to this larger project, and of course to this session today as well. So as Danielle mentioned, I teach at the Loyola University Chicago School of Law. But over the past few years, I have also taught in the tax law programs, including remotely, of a couple of other institutions. And it was in that context that I had the opportunity to coach some teams in the ABA Law Student Tax Challenge, which is a law student competition that's been going on for more than 20 years. So that was a fun experience for me. I'm competitive. I think it was a fun learning and academic experience for students. But one of the things that was very striking to me about that competition was that last year, I don't know what will be happening this year, but last year, participation in that competition and the submission of an entry in that competition required students to certify that they had not used AI. And because the course that I was teaching in support of their participation in that competition was a research course in which we began working on the problem as soon as it was released around Labor Day, students could not use AI to do the research for the problem, right, because the competition required them to certify that they had not used it. Now, that might have been possible for students to do in good faith a year ago. I believe it is no longer possible. And I have no idea, right, what the rules are going to look like this year. But in addition to that rule, that particular certification, the competition, like most traditional law school competitions, stretches out over a semester plus. The problem is released, as I mentioned, around Labor Day. Student submissions are due close to the end of what is usually the academic semester in law school. That is the first Monday after Thanksgiving. And a live competition takes place in January or February at the ABA tax section mid-year meeting. In other words, it's stretched out over many months. So that, while it's typical of law student competitions, of course, does not bear much resemblance to the way that law is actually practiced, right, which is under significant time pressure and more in the tax area, though not only the tax area, assisted enabled involving the use of AI, right? Whether open or proprietary platforms used in lots of ways, in some firms with a lot of guidance and disclosure to clients, in some firms, I suspect, with much, much less. And so I also teach the law of professional responsibility and devoted a unit this past spring to the professionally responsible use of AI. But of course, half of what I taught is already obsolete just a few months later. It is rapidly changing. We need principles for thinking about this. And thus, right, the idea for this competition was born. So the idea is that this is a kind of cross between a more traditional law student competition in terms of who is eligible to participate and what many of you might be familiar with in the computer science world, the so-called hackathon. Right, so a hackathon is a very time compressed, intense problem solving kind of challenge. There's different sorts of hackathons, but the idea was what we wanted to do was give students an extremely compressed time in which to submit a solution to a problem still to be determined. It's one of the things I'd like to talk about a little bit. What sort of problem would be suitable? Where they were permitted, not firmly required, but certainly permitted to use AI platforms in a relatively unrestricted way. So I have been in touch with a few different sponsors. Students will have access to both open and proprietary systems, both through their own libraries, where that is part of their status as a student, but where necessary, if special subscriptions will be required, students who register for the competition will get access to those platforms well in advance of the release of the problem. But the thought is that the time between the release of the problem and submissions being due will be something like 4 or 5 days, not more. It's challenging, of course, because of academic schedules, because if you put it over a weekend, we want to be respectful of students' religious observances and so on without putting anyone at a disadvantage. But we specifically do not want to stretch this out over weeks or months. The idea is the students will be under time pressure. They will be using AI to solve a problem. And my own inclination is that it should be a somewhat less mechanical problem than is typically used in the ABA law student tax competition, which again, without derogating right from the value of that program at all, is typically requiring students to apply statutes, cases, and regs in order to determine kind of yes or no black letter tax questions and problems. In other words, there are right answers, right? And the judges are going to be evaluating submissions against a model answer that has completed various calculations, has included or excluded this item or that item, above the line, below the line, etc. Right? Things that there might be some reason to think AI will be good at if properly instructed and fast at, because many of them are fundamentally mechanical, which is not to say there isn't also judgment involved. For this competition, though the problem has absolutely not been determined, and I'd be very interested in people's thoughts about what would be the right sort of problem, something that requires much more judgment, the much more critical use of AI is more interesting to me. Even though, of course, it will be much more complicated to judge. Thinking about what makes an answer better or worse will be a different process. Figuring out how to judge it fairly when we don't know at the front end how many submissions we'll have, though they can be length limited by words or characters, right? We will figure that out. I'm more interested in a problem like how should the use of AI be taxed? Or how is the use of AI in tax practice likely to be most beneficial, or what are the major risks that it poses? Something where I have no idea what sorts of answer an AI all by itself would generate, how a person working with AI, where they would get to. It's kind of in that vein, right? Something that requires more judgment as well as the use of AI to get a sense of what its limits are, what its strengths are, what its weaknesses are. That is to use it much more critically. Students will be able to use as many of the AI platforms as are available to them or as few. I suppose there would be nothing in theory preventing someone from doing this entirely on their own, right? As far as rules and scoring goes, Hallucinated cases or sources will, of course, be completely disqualifying. That is going to make checking submissions a bit of a pain in the neck, right? Because as what Damien Charlatan refers to as epistemic hygiene standards, right, must be maintained, and that's not so simple to do. It's possible we will close the number of registrations in order to manage this, although I suspect many people may register who don't ultimately submit. So we've got a little bit of an airplane reservation situation. How many tables in the restaurant? We'll have to think about it. But that's a high class problem to have, right? That people are too interested in it. The other kind of logistical decision that I think we're getting close to making, and then I'll turn this over, is the size of teams. So as you may know, many events that include an in-person component, which I think this probably will not, though I would also be open to hearing people's thoughts about that. But many competitions that have an in-person component require teams of 2 or 3, right? Sometimes students have the option of having a third. Sometimes that person's an alternate in litigation style competition. So maybe you have one specialist on one side, one on the other, someone who does both, or maybe to provide for the possibility of an illness or cancellation, whatever, you'd have a team of 3. The ABA competition requires teams of exactly 2. My inclination here, again, open to suggestion, is that it could be teams of 1 or 2. So a person who decided they wanted to do this by themselves, that is a natural person who wants to do this by themselves with the help of an AI, could do it, or 2 natural people plus an AI, 1 natural person and 3 different AIs. So I'm kind of thinking probably 1 or 2 enrolled students. And again, depending on some of the logistics and thoughts, we might mirror the ABA style in having a JD division and an LLM division, in which to be eligible in the JD division, you must not have a JD. That could potentially also be open to students who are in some tax master's programs who might find this interesting. And then an LLM division would be for JD holders currently enrolled in tax LLMs. So I think not having those folks competing against each other, that's something the ABA has kind of settled on, and I think probably for good reasons. So I will stop there because we're at quarter past, and I want to have everybody have time. But that's me and where the genesis of this idea. Julie?
Hello, everybody. Diane, thank you so much for that introduction and all of your work on this. I think your background in having taught advanced federal tax research and professional responsibility makes you kind of uniquely suited to these ideas and this competition. So just wanted to start off by saying thank you for all your work here. So let me introduce myself. I'm the director of graduate tax programs at Loyola Law School, and this competition very much interests me because I've given a lot of thought into kind of how AI plays out in tax law practice, but then also, the best way to effectively teach students so that they're hitting the ground running coming out of tax LLM programs. So a little bit of intersection between what I do and why this competition, I believe, is a great idea and a great opportunity for students. So Loyola provides a tax LLM in a couple of different variations, right? We allow JD students to get a JD tax LLM in 3 years with a summer intensive program. We allow what we call hybrid JD students who are getting their JD while working or doing something else over 4 years to also get a tax LLM in those 4 years. And then we have full-time tax LLMs that can get the degree in a year, combined with also part-time tax LLMs. These are, legal practitioners already who are getting a tax LLM over part-time over 3 years. So you can see that in Loyola's programs, we have a lot of different students learning tax at different phases of their career, right? Some of them, have not passed a bar yet. They're 1LJD students. Others have been practicing in tax for a long time and have come back to school to get the degree. The program requires 24 units of online asynchronous combined with live sessions. Um, I've co-created four of the asynchronous courses. And interestingly, pedagogically, a lot of the thought that went into the co-creation of those asynchronous courses, I also believe similarly goes into the thinking about the intersection of legal education and AI. Um, I think I teach a bunch of different tax courses, but one of the courses I teach is tax law practice, where students can meet their upper division JD writing requirement. And so there's a challenge here, which is how do you teach students the skills that they need, the statutory interpretation, the treasury reg interpretation, the tax research, and at the same time have an AI transparent policy and help them become AI proficient. Because that is, where we are at in tax law practice, right? Students should graduate with their tax LLM having all the skills that we know they need with statutory interpretation and research, but also being AI proficient. So there's a pedagogical issue there, I believe, which is, you know, if you give them the shortcut ahead of time, are they going to lose the basic skills? It reminds me of when I got my tax LLM and, I'd get instructions like, don't use Westlaw and Lexis for this portion of it, right? Because they wanted you to go to the library and know how the resources work. So I think we kind of have similar issues going on right now in terms of thinking about the type of problems that would be in an AI competition or just in any kind of curriculum, right? I've given some thought to kind of what problems would be not AI vulnerable, but would kind of short circuit the learning process, right? Problems where the answers are, black letter summary of the law that don't require a lot of synthesis and a lot of judgment. And so, things that I've been thinking about creating exams, assessments, and problems that require judgment, synthesis, justification. You can do that in a couple different ways. One of those ways is kind of process documentation. If you're talking about a course, not a competition. So you have students, turn in drafts and there's a, kind of structured process. You may or may not have that in a competition, but I think, the specificity of the assignments of the problems, it can be highly specific, context rich, requiring engagement with a certain amount of material that AI couldn't just come in and summarize. And I think those are the types of things that we'd be trying to do in a competition. I know Diane used the word hackathon, and I think part of the challenge in a competition like this would be to create a problem where competitors are getting from it all of the things, the basic skills, as well as the AI proficiency. And I think kind of the crux of what we're doing here is going to be the generation of that problem. And so I can't wait to hear from some of you on kind of the pedagogy on the intersection of AI and your tax teaching. Thank you.
I am not a tax person. Hi, I'm Jordan Jefferson. As mentioned, I teach at Quinnipiac University School of Law, and I'm also the director of our law library. I've been working in legal technology, AI specifically, for almost a decade, but lots of legal technology and emerging technologies from legal research platform specific sort of areas. I currently teach legal research to all of our 1Ls. And I was lucky enough to I teach a fully asynchronous class, and I was lucky enough to be able to develop that class here at the onset of ChatGPT. So I was able to actually integrate the generative AI thought process into the way that we teach legal research, the way that we think about and what we value in traditional legal research skills, traditional legal research pedagogy. I was able to kind of pull some of the things that Julie was just talking about, the judgment, synthesis, reflection, context, prompting, all of that, and build it into some of our coursework while still trying to maintain some of those traditional legal research skills like preliminary analysis, which is just the first step in a good prompt, right? So being able to kind of make the things that I learned in law school relevant to the students who are taking my class today. I would like to just say, as much as I work in AI, I am still and will probably firmly say that I am AI agnostic. Use it or don't. We have been sort of told and sold by vendors and our tech bros out there in the world that this is it. This is the thing. It's here. It's going to be here. It's going to change everything. We're seeing some sort of fluctuations in how people feel about artificial intelligence and the use of artificial intelligence. Um, Basically, my goal is to create thoughtful, critical, engaged technology users, whether it's generative AI, quantum compute, whatever it is, whatever's coming next, whatever came before. I have students who still don't know how to open up a Word document. I'm not super worried about their ability to use like agentic AI at this exact stage in my professional career. Um, but the point for me is for them to understand when a tech solution, what in this case generative AI, is fit for purpose. So that's sort of who I am and my thoughts around that and what I do. Um, I believe that legal research is sort of fundamentally different now than it was. Not fundamentally, the fundamentals are the same, but the doing of it is different, obviously. We're doing things backwards, right? Now, generative AI can produce a fairly fluent, professional sounding document and can tell you like these are the research, these are all of the cases that you need, here's the statute that you need, and doesn't this sound really wonderful? And students who don't have the underlying knowledge or even what was it, I like the phrase and I can never say it, I can never ever say epi the autonomy. I have the professional judgment and autonomy to ask the questions, is this good? Is this contextually accurate? Why does this answer seem right to me? Right. So for me, it's going beyond verification, which is what a lot of people are getting in trouble for, right? Hallucinated cases, things like that. And they should be getting in trouble for that, right? But verification is already a task that is required of us under 3.3, right? So verifying whether a case is correct or not and is used correctly or not is already a professional requirement for us. So what do I like to focus on and what do I think a competition like this could focus on? Judgment. Prompt design is legal reasoning, right? Applying foundational legal reasoning skills to a new context. Like I said, it's preliminary analysis, but in just a different context, right? Still talking jurisdiction, still thinking key facts. Also, and I don't know how we judge this, so this is something I'd love to hear from other educators in the room, right? But metacognition, asking students to think about their thinking, right? So this is a reflective component. Can we do this in a competition? I don't know. Maybe we can. Maybe if the first set of this maybe the first time we do this competition, it's one thing, but the second time, the in-person part is reflection. Who knows? I don't like to think of Gen AI models as answer machines, not answering machines, which shows you how old I am, but like, answer machines. And that is how a lot of people use them, lawyers included, right? I'm going to ask it a question and it is going to tell me the answer. That is not how these tools work. These tools require this sort of critical engagement and require us to critically reflect on why and how we're using them. And I think that's something that we can build into a competition like this. And then evaluative judgment. So again, beyond verification, is the legal reasoning sound? Is it contextually or factually appropriate? I also think that something like this, a competition like this from a pedagogical standpoint, is really, really important for a few reasons. One, I think there's experiential learning at scale, right? As Diane mentioned, it replicates real world professional pressure, but in a supervised and almost safe context. It forces a real world, again, like just to echo Diane, it forces a real world conversation and decision making about ethics what are we willing to do? What are we willing, like, we have this much time and this much to do. What are we willing to compromise on, if anything? The answer should be nothing, but we'll see what that actually says. Also, competence, hands-on fluency with the AI tools that they will encounter in practice, which leads me to sort of synthesis and fluency, mirroring the multidisciplinary complexity of modern legal practice, right? You're going to need to understand, and again, I'm going to show you how I'm not a tax person, tax doctrine and regulations and how to utilize these tools appropriately. And then finally, for me, this is sort of the biggest thing that I would like to do with any competition and any time I teach this, is I'd like to create a cohort of AI fluent students, not just AI literate. I don't want them to have a basic understanding, but I want them to really understand how to engage with the technology or choose not to engage with the technology, depending on context, situation, time, price, right? Ethics, morals, all of the things. And then hopefully create some reverse mentors. Because here in Connecticut, the median age of our profession is 55. And so newer law students are coming into smaller or medium-sized firms or even large firms, and they're going to be able to help navigate the policy conversations around technologies like that. And I think something like this can give them a real world experience, again, in a sort of a safe and structured environment, giving those suggestions, creating that conversation around when are these tools fit for purpose. So that's a little bit about my thinking.
Danielle, do you have some questions that you want to share? There were a few comments that I wanted to make, but if there are questions backed up, we can certainly turn to those.
Sure. We have several questions so far in the Q&A section. Please keep them coming. We'll incorporate as many as we can. You can post them in the Q&A section of the Zoom, or you can post them in the chat, and we'll be looking in both places. I'll try to categorize these or lump these together a bit. One of our first question, I think you've already answered about separate JD and LLM categories, but we have kind of a related question, which is asking whether you would recommend students have taken specific courses or be a particular level in school to participate. So it's posted by an anonymous participant, but I assume that latter part is referring for the JD students. Should they be a 3L or would a 2L be able to be successful? So particular courses and or particular level in school.
So I have a couple thoughts about it, but I certainly want Julie and Jordan to chime in with their thoughts about it as well. The current intention is that students would be able to register for this competition starting in around January and get access to the platforms with a problem release and due date falling somewhere in March, right? That's sort of the rough and ready. So no one will be absolutely a first semester student, right? Even a 1L would be a semester into law school, but almost certainly would not have taken tax. Whether this is the kind of thing you can do without having taken tax, whether someone would even be interested in doing it without having taken tax, I'm not sure. It's a little bit of an experiment. A lot of students who are interested in tax, who take it as soon as they can, will take it in their third semester of law school. And so which would mean they would probably have taken individual federal income tax. And I'm inclined, kind of in alignment with the approach that's taken by the ABA Law Student Tax Competition, that the JD problem will center on the individual federal income tax, even if it is much less mechanical, that they would have been introduced to enough to be able to think reflectively, right, about that, and that the LLM problem at the ABA level, it has included some combination of partnership, corporate, sometimes international, sometimes estate and gift. But the idea is with LLM students or with more advanced students, having taken a few tax courses would have exposed them to the research materials and so enable them to decide. And again, we're intending to make this very low barrier to entry. It will be free to participate. And if you look at the problem and you can't make heads or tails of it, you don't do it. right? It's there's no punishment attached. So, and again, because this will be a little bit less mechanical, it won't be if you don't know how to get to exactly the right code section to handle a corporate reverse merger, then you don't have a chance. That's not the sort of level, right, that I think we're hoping to aim at. But it is a good question in thinking about how, when we pitch it more broadly, right, what students we think, right, should do it or might enjoy doing it. But again, it's an experiment. I mean, won't the tax teachers be brought up short if someone who's never taken tax wins?
Excellent. And so I think related to that, we got a comment that came in as you were speaking. It says you could include a post-competition survey to find out more about the students and their approaches to use for planning the next competition. So
Yeah,
audience
and
suggestion.
I probably will set it up in such a way that when students register, there's a box they have to click about their willingness to do so. Again, there's
Mhm.
no discipline attached, but to kind of get people thinking about that from the beginning after you submit, right? Then we'll want your reflections, which will also be a way of capturing some of those reflections. How was it? What worked? What didn't work? Which also kind of goes to a point to which Jordan was alluding, which is if the interface, if the platform itself is not user friendly, they won't use it. They'll use a different one because they're not being forced into one. They'll have a choice of at least three or four. And they may use the one that was used in their 1L legal research class, if anything was used. They may use the one that seems the user friendliest. They may actually be fluent enough that they already have a favorite. Could be all over the place.
Good. Well, and I just want to draw a little extra attention. I hope you all picked up on what Diane said, that the competition will be free. We know from coaching and teaching advocacy that cost can be a barrier to entry. Some schools do not have support, particularly for subject-specific competitions. So having just if you allow me for a moment, having been someone who's judged a number of competitions at different schools and regional and national level, we often get students who are there on their own dime. And so virtual competitions are critical to allowing those students to participate. So I know this competition hasn't happened yet, but thank you very much for keeping that in mind for all of our potential competitors out there. So I think this question kind of relates to
Could
how
I
the
say just one thing quickly
Sure.
about that? Because I do appreciate you bringing it up. And I should have mentioned it sooner. So this will give me a chance to talk about it for a moment. One of the reasons why I am disinclined for it to have any in-person component, even though that always seems fun, like, can't we get together at some fancy place, right? Whatever it is I'm committed to this as a matter of accessibility, not just economic, but disability, every kind of access. And so, yes, it's all fun to get together at a fancy hotel. We've done it. We're tired of it. Students may not be tired of it, but it's more important to me to reduce all barriers to participation to the best degree that we can. And we've got some sponsors. The costs of putting this on are going to be minimal. The overhead's going to be minimal, and that is quite intentional.
Excellent. Love to hear that so much. So we have a related question. You're getting a lot of claps coming in. I don't know if you all can see that on your screens. So related to the AI usage, will competitors be required to disclose what AI they use and how they use it by including a log?
So we haven't gotten that far yet, but so I think that that's maybe where the reflective component can come in. As a legal research instructor, I'm a huge fan of a research log, and I'm sure as people who've all taken legal research, you are not, or maybe, so this is an AI enabled competition, which means we would expect some level of AI, some level of AI usage, whether that is, like Diane mentioned, your Westlaw co-counsel or your Lexis protege, to maybe your more niche tools that we might be able to give them access to, like, Blue Jay or something like that, specific to the tax realm, or even some of the general purpose tools like GPT or Claude or Perplexity or something like that. I would like to know, just from a pedagogical standpoint, sort of when we review the submissions, what tools seem to do what part of the competition better, worse. Again, it goes to this sort of thinking about the metacognition, but also the understanding of when to use what tool in what way. And I don't know how much of that is going to be in this first iteration or maybe even the second or third iteration, but I do think that's an important component to think about when teaching technology tools. GPT is not for everything. It's not for most things, actually, right? What tools work best in what situations? And I think a log or something like that would be an easy-ish way to get that going. It could also be that we have them, use Zoom and take video capture, right? Like, I'm not sure what that looks like, but I do think that that's maybe where some of that reflection can come into it. But that's just off the top of my head. We haven't discussed it yet.
The other thing is that I would guess, I shouldn't say assume, but I would guess that for proprietary platforms to which they will be given special access, like BlueJay, who will be participating, we'll be able to get back end data, right? We'll be able to get usage data from their end, right? When did this code number log in? How long were they logged in for? The same way that they would use it to bill somebody. So whether they do with it, how they would share that with us, how we would get that data, I'm not sure. But I think that data is recoverable one way or another, and for sure would be interesting. And, it's going to give somebody bragging rights that, right, this platform was the one that was used by the winner.
Excellent. So you mentioned metacognition a couple times. So we're going to transition to those questions related to reflection and assessment. So Greg wrote in our chat, metacognition is frequently assessed in negotiation competitions because a post-negotiation self-assessment is made part of the competition. I'm just dreaming a little about how you'd expose students to some other thoughts after the first stage and let them metacogitate. Related, we have another question that says, could students be required to reflect in a legal memo on their experience and processes? And a related question, the ABA mediation competition requires a self-reflection and assessment component. Perhaps that could be a component of this competition too.
Yeah, those are all really good thoughts, really good recommendations. The other thing that I've, again, had not talked about this to Julie or Diane, so forgive me for jumping over all the things, but I also really love peer assessment. I think that our students, they pay to hear from us, but they really care about what their colleagues think and how well they. And I think there might be some reflection or opportunity there as well. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how it looks. Maybe it's 5 days, but on day 2, you have to submit what you've already done to your opposing team. And they, who knows what that looks like. And I don't know if that's unmanageable from our side. But that might give them an opportunity to reflect on what the other teams are doing, how the other team's process, maybe alter their processes in response to another team's work. So again, we're just trying to get our arms around what a competition like this could look like that is meaningful to not just here is the materials and how do we get to an answer, but also how do we utilize these tools and how do we think about these tools in this process. So I think they're really great suggestions. I don't know how we would incorporate them, but I think we probably will. And I'll give it over to Diane and
Do you have thoughts about it, Julie, from a pedagogical point of view, including in the asynchronous courses that you've designed, which is one of those places where it's a special challenge, I think, and maybe structurally similar?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think, with you gain metacognition with some sort of process requirements. I've been a big fan of that in terms of, number of drafts, getting students' feedback. In my tax law practice course, for example, they mark up a bunch of different transactional documents, but then under each comment, they specifically state why they made that choice, right? Was it very aggressive? Do they hope that their negotiation partner on the other side will come back with a compromise position? And so I definitely think pedagogically asking the students or the competitors to specify why they made the choices that they made can be very helpful.
Good. So moving to just the judging portion of the competition. We have a couple questions related to that. And I know you touched on you don't have that all fleshed out yet. So we have some general questions, and then I think a couple that zoom in to a little bit more detail. So I will ask you this cluster of questions together, and then just please do as you have been. Just feel free to interact with kind of whatever part of that is most interesting or stands out the most to you. So we have a holistic question or a general question from Elizabeth, who asks, how will the entries be scored? What is the evaluative criteria? And then a little more focused, we have, will there be a requirement for students to anchor legal ethics into their AI workflows? I know that speaks to those of you on our panel who are the AI ethics experts. And then we have a question about will AI be doing the first pass of judging for the competition?
So I have a few thoughts about it, but I'm definitely open to suggestions, right? So glad to take questions, but also affirmative suggestions, and hope people will not hesitate to reach out to us by email otherwise, right? Even after this is over. Yes, obviously the challenge that all of us who do assessment, most of us have been socialized into assessment to think that in a way, the more similar the answers are intended to be, the fairer you can be, right? The idea that a spelling test or a math test is always going to be the fairest because you're asking people to do the exact same thing, and there were right answers and there were wrong answers, and it could in effect be mechanically scored. And then we're off to the races with so-called objective assessment, where all of us who actually do assessment realize, right, it's like it's only as objective as what you put in. It's yes, even if your Scantron machine is a perfect Scantron machine, B still has to be the right answer, right? Even if you have a machine that is perfect at identifying whether someone has chosen B or not. That's not the tricky part. So in some ways, the ABA competition operates in that way, right? It's asking, is this item includable? And if so, at what percentage? It's a formula. You're applying it. You're totaling things up that'll go in this box, that box, the other box. Tax practitioners, of course, know a lot of judgment goes into that, but the output has that objective character. How much of that we want to retain, right? Versus like, how do you compare? I've also taught a seminar. Jordan may actually have been in this seminar. She's a former student of mine. That's a law review note writing seminar where everyone is choosing their own topic. How do you compare? Someone's is more novel, but someone else's is more carefully researched, and someone else's is just genuinely better written, but it's superficial by comparison. Right? We have all dealt with these things, right, as legal educators. That's exactly this notion of judgment, coming to an understanding of the better and the worse. Yes, it is always going to feel in some ways unfair to students. That's right, right? They're going to say, I chose this hard topic and I got a lower grade than this person who chose. So it goes, right? But I think one of the ways that we want to engage with what AI makes possible is just to take this on. I mean, what I have often found when I've worked in assessment training settings, right? So bar exam grading, things like that, is through conversation, the judges can come to a high degree of consensus on the better and the worse, even if their reasons are slightly different or what they're applying. I mean, obviously, we want to give students guidelines about how answers will be scored. But I'm kind of an Aristotelian about it, and I do not want to lend to it a greater degree of certainty than the subject matter itself will admit of, right? The better we can create an illusion of that. I don't want to create an illusion of that. I want it to be as open as possible. I want to create the opportunity for the judges to be surprised by what the best answer is. Right. And I think many competitions, that's just not possible. Right. It's like, how does it conform to this answer key we created in advance? And again, that has its purposes, but this competition doesn't affect anyone's grades. It doesn't. Right. And so I would rather be more creative. Or open, I guess, is my thought.
I also just want to, it also seems that kind of thinking reflects a little bit more of what they might find when they're up against a judge, right? Like we can use all the data and analytics and predictive analytics that we want to say that this judge that eats lunch at 2 p.m. Like noon on a Tuesday is more inclined to grant this kind of motion. but it doesn't always happen, right? So that sense of, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to try some things. And then I'm going to reflect on it. I'm going to tell you why I did it and how I did it. And maybe if I do it the coolest, the most interesting, the most uh, reflective, the deepest, whatever adjective I want to throw in there. I played a lot of Mad Libs with my kids on a 7.5 hour car ride from Maine yesterday. Um, However I end up doing that, maybe I'll be the one to win, as opposed to just a standardized, like, well, you get 10 points for this, you get 9 points for that, you get 8 points for this. Legal practice doesn't work like that, and it shouldn't work like that. It's a very human-centered thing where sometimes the outcome doesn't match what you put out or what the other person put in. So I'm kind of inclined to go with Diane here, as well I should be because we're on the same team. But I think it's reflective of the kind of thinking we want them to do in something like this.
And a peer evaluation idea that just occurred to me, I'd have to think about its mechanics, would be asking students to rank some number of submissions, not including their own, after they submit. Shuffle them, and that part of the competition is read these 5 submissions, none of which are yours, and rank them. That's all. And see what we get.
Yeah. So related to that, so Kirsten Davis is has appeared in the chat, and so she says that your idea of incorporating peer review is spot on, and that received some heart responses from other members of our audience today. And she says perhaps one of the things you can evaluate is how students decided which platforms to use and when, such as are students using the right judgment points to decide. So great comment and suggestion. And so related to judging, we have a question. Could you have judging panels where each round gets a tax expert, an AI expert, and a combo expert?
Well, volunteers are happily encouraged in all these areas. And so I have, as some of you may know, I've been presenting this some version of this in a variety of settings. So I have done this in front of tax people. I'm now right in front of tech people and pedagogy people, in the hopes that people will find it interesting. I think it is right that some part of the judging has to be done by people with enough expertise in tax to know what they're looking at. And I think I've got, I know enough people in that part of the legal academy that I'm pretty confident. Particularly if we keep the submissions manageable in length, right? And so what people would be asked to do is, and again, it might be something as simple as just rank these in the order of the grasp of key tax concepts and rules that you see reflected here. That's it, right? You don't have to comment down to the line. You don't have to check whether that reg really exists. That will happen another way. Which of these strike you, right, as the work of someone who has a real grasp of the material? And I think for advanced tax practitioners, that would be easy most of the time, right? Even if it's mostly intuitive. Julie, thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that on the tax side. And, for a competition specifically where AI use is not only an option but encouraged, something that I've been thinking about is kind of how each person or team has ownership of their own work, right? We don't want to see just carbon copy. We want to see that, that judgment, that synthesis, the why decisions were made. How did that team or person still make it their own? And I think that's going to be an interesting component.
It kind of reminds me of judging a paper competition, where you don't necessarily have a strict grading rubric. You have some categories and some guidelines, but it's a little bit more of a holistic review. So maybe borrowing some things from a competition like that could be helpful to you all in how you want to have the judges assess the work here. Let's see. So we have a couple more questions. Please get your final questions in. We are almost at the end of our hour. I know time flies when you're having fun. And so we have a question here about Well, we'll ask that one last. Considering your collective experience and expertise in creating asynchronous courses, would you be willing to create an introductory crash course competitors can take online to help them prepare for the competition? That's not a loaded question at all.
Yeah, I think something like that is probably more or less mandatory, especially with a competition that's so new that there's no one to talk to about it. And so whatever form that's in, and that includes something that came as an idea out of one of these kinds of sessions to make sure that students have access to these platforms well in advance of the release of the problem. And so they can then find their way around. We probably will need to have some kind of helpline, right? You can't get into this. Who do you call, right? What if this isn't working the right way? Yeah, in advance, so that students who register early will be benefited because they'll have a little longer time, but there will be some end of registration that is enough before the release of the problem that everyone will have at least a few weeks to noodle around a little bit. But yeah, I think we will create I think the website that will administer the competition is going to be created by tax notes, tax analysts, the people who publish tax notes. And I don't think it would be hard at all to have a couple of little short videos. So you want to do this, so you want to do that. And including maybe just enough rudimentary intro to tax so that someone who's willing to jump in, who hasn't done much tax, at least knows, can get a little bit of the lay of the land. And Julie may have existing modules that could be made available for this purpose or repurposed.
Yeah, I would say there's a number of things that we could do, Cali lessons that we can give out. There are, things that I think all of us have in our pockets, but also we just don't want the students to come into it and not have, we're teachers first and foremost, right? And this is a competition, but we want everyone to kind of have a level playing field. So I do think that we'd have to create something like this. It would be malpractice for us to create a competition and then be like, go ahead, have fun, do whatever, without, it wouldn't be malpractice, but it would be bad for us. It's a bad look.
And that relates to what Diane was saying about accessibility as well. So excellent. I think you have a suggestion here for what the problem could consist of. It says, what about a problem where an employee uses AI in their daily work and whether it can be a write-off to them as an employment expense? Don't know how far you want to get into answering that. The substance of that question is that could potentially be a question or the problem for your inaugural year, but this anonymous participant threw that idea out there for y'all.
All suggestions gratefully received, for sure.
Excellent. Well, I think I'm trying to make sure that we don't miss any more big questions. We do have a comment or maybe a shout out from Tracy. It says there are schools like Temple that have tax as a 1L elective. Very cool. We'd have to follow up. How do you find time to do that? But that's perhaps a personal question that the host is indulging in today. So I think we probably have time for one more question. And so this one I think is an appropriate way to wrap things up. And it says, I just lost it. Sorry. This one is asking, after today, where can interested professors and potential coaches follow news of this competition?
It's a good question, and that's somebody who's a little bit ahead of me. I have a meeting later on this week, I think, or early next week with the tax notes, tax analyst people. I will talk to him about how soon a platform, a web page, a landing page will be set up that will have at least the beginning of information. And when it does, it will certainly be promulgated through this section and perhaps a few other AALS sections of interest, including the tax section. So I will talk to him. I think it's a sensible question that might mean we want to get the landing page up and running, even if it is just kind of a check back here, so people know it's a real thing. So yeah, I can add that to my agenda with him at our next meeting.
Excellent. So with that, we have just a couple minutes left. If y'all want to make any kind of closing comments, and then I'll take just a minute or two to wrap up before we close out our session today.
Nothing more from me other than thank you all, and I look forward to hearing from folks who might be interested in participating, even if it's just to give suggestions from the bleachers.
Excellent. Well, We are just about at the top of the next hour. So first, we want to thank our speakers so much for a very exciting presentation. Thank you for being our speakers today and supporting our summer series and sharing your